Rachel Maddow Show starts now with the one and only Rachel Maddow, who is back looking tan and dynamic and bright and well rested, and It's wonderful to have you back.
You're raising incredible expectations here.
The screen.
Thank you very much.
Good to have you back.
Thanks. Cheers. Now I feel a little embarrassed, but in a nice way. That's very flattering. All right. Thanks to you for joining us this hour. It's not really a tan. I'm just blushing. All right. Chances are, unless you are trying to promote your awesome band, chances are you maybe do not visit the site MySpace that much anymore. Remember MySpace? This is what MySpace looks like these days. They've made it very famous. 2009, it was a less fancy MySpace page that created a big problem for a Republican Senate candidate. This is the band Commander, a publicity shot for Commander, the band. The handsome lad on the far left there, the one with the shoulder-length hairdo, his name is Chris Hightower. Mr. Hightower sang vocals in this skulls with bat wings and fangs and lightning metal band called Commander. But while he was fronting his awesome band back in 2009, the lead singer for Commander also had time to moonlight as campaign spokesman for the state Senate candidate named Rand Paul. Campaign curious about Mr. Hightower to trawl through his presence on MySpace. And there it was soon discovered that in addition to the tough guy band photos of Commander, Mr. Hightower's site also included comments like this, posted on his MySpace page. Happy N-word Day. That's in celebration of Martin Luther King Jr. Day that year. Happy N-word Day, posted alongside this photo on the MySpace page of Rand Paul's Senate campaign spokesman. This stuff was reportedly posted there for a couple of years and was still just there waiting to be discovered once Rand Paul picked this guy to be the public face of his campaign for U.S. Senate. Ultimately, once this all was reported out, Mr. Hightower had to resign as spokesman for the Senate campaign, but that was a campaign that Rand Paul went on to win. That embarrassment happened back in 2009, and part of the reason I think that issue stuck more than it might have with anybody else in politics is because this all happened only about a year after Rand Paul's father, Ron Paul, as a 2008 presidential candidate, had to answer for really overtly racist content in his Ron Paul newsletters and something called the Ron Paul Report. These were things that Congressman Ron Paul had signed his name to and sent out for years to people who wanted to hear from Ron Paul, the great libertarian hope. This is one of the newsletters from February 1990. Quote, boy, it sure burns me, it's written in the first person like that, it sure burns me to have a national holiday for that pro-communist philanderer Martin Luther King. I voted against this outrage time and time again as a congressman. What an infamy that Ronald Reagan approved it. We can thank him for our annual Hate Whitey Day. Or this Ron Paul report from October 1992, quote, if you live in a major city, you've probably already heard about the newest threat to your life and limb and your family. It's called carjacking. It is the hip-hop thing to do among the urban youth who play unsuspecting whites like pianos. What can you do? More and more Americans are carrying a gun in the car. An ex-cop I know advises that if you have to use a gun on a youth, you should leave the scene immediately, disposing of the wiped-off gun as soon as possible. Such a gun cannot, of course, be registered to you, but one bought privately, through the classifieds, for example. This first-person account from the Ron Paul newsletter continues, I frankly don't know what to make of such advice, but even in my little town of Lake Jackson, Texas, I've urged everyone in my family to know how to use a gun in self-defense, for the animals are coming. When the New Republic reported on the contents of some of this stuff bearing Ron Paul's name when he was a presidential candidate back in 2008, the response from the then Republican candidate for president was that he had no idea who was writing these newsletters or what was in them. These Ron Paul newsletters that were written in the first person that everybody thought he was writing himself and that he signed his name to.
I have no idea. Have you ever heard of a publisher of a magazine not knowing every single thing? The editor is responsible for the daily activities, and people came and go, and there were some people that were hired. I don't know any of their names. I do not, absolutely honestly, do not know who wrote those things.
The editor there is responsible. Even though Ron Paul said he had no idea who was writing all this racist stuff in his newsletters, everybody around him, and him there a little bit himself, they seem to know exactly who was writing this stuff, or at least who should be blamed. Ron Paul's chief ghostwriter, a guy by the name of Lew Rockwell. Blame him. He's the guy who was dealing with this stuff, not me. And even though Ron Paul did everything he could to distance himself from all that racist stuff in his newsletters that everyone was saying was actually written by Lew Rockwell, even though it was signed Ron Paul, you know, as soon as Ron Paul retired from Congress this year, he started up his Ron Paul Institute. Guess who he appointed to the board of his Ron Paul Institute? Hey, Lew Rockwell, the guy they blamed for all the super racist, the animals are coming newsletters. He gets a seat on the board. Also on the board of Ron Paul's Institute is a professor named Walter Block, who says the real problem with the Civil War was that the wrong side won and that Abraham Lincoln was a monster. And it is because all that has happened already that you might be forgiven today if today's flurry of reporting about a Rand Paul Senate staffer felt a little bit like deja vu. A conservative website in Washington did a deep dive today into the background of a Rand Paul staffer who looks like this. You might have seen the photo today. Do we have? Yes, there we go. He does not wear this mask thing to work anymore, but he used to. And just in case it's not totally clear, those are not decorative stars on his wrestling mask. That is a Confederate flag wrestling mask. This is a man who likes to be called the Southern Avenger. His real name is Jack Hunter. And it's not like Mr. Hunter has been hiding this persona under a bushel, right? Here's his official website, branded prominently with the Southern Avenger logo. His YouTube page has the SA, Southern Avenger. That's his Southern Avenger logo. His Twitter handle is all Southern Avenger. And when he goes on Fox Business Network, which he does frequently, they describe him as someone who co-wrote Rand Paul's book and who is someone sometimes known as the Southern Avenger. I'd love to talk to the producer who had to write that, Chiron. Did that raise any questions for you about why you booked this guy? This is the job that Mr. Hunter had before Rand Paul hired him to come to Washington to be a Senate staffer and to ghostwrite his book. Mr. Hunter was a radio commentator, and he'd say things like, quote, "The term diversity has become nothing more than a code word for not white. It's a shame that just because we have fair skin, we are always denied fair treatment." Or this, modern Americans aren't wrong to deplore the millions of Mexicans coming here now. A non-white majority America would simply cease to be America. Or there's this one about how John Wilkes Booth's heart was in the right place. John Wilkes Booth, of course, who shot Lincoln. The Southern Avenger does regret that Lincoln's murder automatically turned him into a martyr. He says he raises a personal toast every May 10th to celebrate the birthday of John Wilkes Booth, the man who shot Lincoln. And that was how he was making his bones in the world. That was his public persona when Rand Paul hired him to bring him to Washington. This problem, though, is not a Paul family affliction. I mean, it is obviously a Paul family affliction, but not them alone. The Southern Avenger, same guy, was also hired by Jim DeMint to co-write his most recent book. Jim DeMint, of course, is no longer a senator. He quit being a senator to go run the Heritage Foundation, the conservative think tank. Once he was there, he decided that the Heritage Foundation should write a big comprehensive study on why immigration reform is a terrible idea. To co-author the study, he hired a guy whose doctoral dissertation had been about the intellectual inferiority of immigrants in the United States. Immigrants do not have the same level of cognitive ability as native-born Americans. Quote, "No one knows whether Hispanics will ever reach IQ parity with whites, but the prediction that Hispanic immigrants will have low IQ children and grandchildren is difficult to argue against." By 2010, that same guy was posting on white nationalist websites like Alternative Right, which is a full-on white power, white supremacist website, posting there saying that Hispanics are substantially more likely than whites to commit serious crimes. Quote, "These findings are not due to age differences or immigration violations or other statistical artifacts." He called it simply the reality of Hispanic crime. This guy's entire background, his whole record of public output, what he brings to the table as a potential hire, is this idea that you can qualitatively rank human beings intellectually by race.
You have Jews with the highest average IQ, usually followed by East Asians, and then you have non-Jewish whites, Hispanics, and then blacks.
That's, of course, the racial hierarchy of IQ, explained at an American Enterprise Institute forum while David Frum sat there and smiled. This is the guy who Jim DeMint hired to be his senior policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation, specifically to have that guy crunch the numbers on whether immigration reform was a good idea. And lo and behold, using this young man's formula, which assumes that non-white immigrants just racially don't have the capacity to contribute anything to this country, lo and behold, when you use that formula, the study concludes that immigration reform is going to be darn expensive, since these people inherently are just parasites. That Heritage Foundation report, which said that immigration reform would therefore cost something like $6 trillion, turned out to be kind of a mathematical laughingstock even before people realized that it was written by the white supremacist guy. But when that factor emerged, the racist IQ-ranking senior policy analyst at Heritage under Jim DeMint was allowed to quietly resign. Since then, Jim DeMint and the Heritage Foundation continue to cite his study in using it to try to kill immigration reform. And so the question, not just today, but persistently for the modern Republican Party is this embarrassing? I mean, sometimes it's embarrassing to them, right? And sometimes it's not. The guy with the MySpace page and the happy N-word day and the lynching photo, apparently that was embarrassing, more embarrassing than Commander was, and he had to be fired. When the Republican Senate Majority Leader in 2002 said the country would not have had all these problems over the years if we had just elected a segregationist president when we had the chance with Strom Thurmond, that apparently was embarrassing, and he had to lose his job. But in 2007, when Ron Paul was running for president, and in addition to everything else, the newsletters and all the rest of it, he got donations from the Klan leader who founded Stormfront, the Nazi white nationalist web forum. That apparently wasn't embarrassing. Ron Paul did not return those donations and quite avowedly did not feel bad about keeping them. In terms of today's Rand Paul news, Dave Weigel reports today that the Confederate flag mask-wearing Southern Avenger guy, that reporting on him as a Rand Paul staffer is not likely to affect his standing or his job in Rand Paul world. The staffer in question told the Free Beacon today that he does not stand by some of the most inflammatory things he said, but he said that he believed in the past, but he avowedly stood by them back at the time that Rand Paul was hiring him in the first place and having him write his book. So at the micro level, there is this unresolved question in Republican politics about whether overt Confederate white supremacist stuff is embarrassing, whether people should be able to hold those views and also be active in mainstream conservative politics and mainstream Republican Party politics. At the macro level, though, beyond those kind of staffing decisions, there's also the larger strategic question of what the Republican Party wants to be. Should the Republican Party be just the party of aggrieved white people, even to the extent that it may stray occasionally into Confederate territory in order to do that? Do you want that in order to maximize every possible white vote you can get out of an electorate that is less and less white all the time? Does the party want that? Or does the party want to try to have any multiracial appeal at all? And that overall strategic question looms every day over everyday decisions that Republican politicians have to make right now. When the immigration reform bill got to the Senate floor, 14 Republicans in the Senate voted for it. And there was all this pressure to have a big bipartisan vote on that bill. So not only would it pass the Senate, but enough Republicans would find their way to support it passing that it would look like both Democrats and Republicans, at least some Republicans, could be unified around the idea that immigration policies should be driven by something other than just anti-immigrant animus. All the Democrats are on board. But if only some of the Republicans could say yes, enough to let it pass, then maybe that would soften the party's image. That is how it got through the Senate. But now, with each passing day, it is looking less and less likely like it is going to get through the House because of Republican opposition there. Conservative media is now essentially unified in telling Republicans in the House that they should not worry about trying to appeal to Hispanic voters or anybody else other than base voters back home in their districts. According to the National Review today, House Republicans should put a stake through the heart of immigration reform. Stop apologizing for who you are. Let your freak flag fly. Which side wins this argument? Joining us now is my poor beleaguered friend, Nicole Wallace, former communications director for the George W. Bush administration, former senior advisor for the McCain-Palin campaign. Nicole, I apologize, but it's all true.
It's so awesome to come on after Mask Guy and Commando Freak. And I mean, like, next time if you could have a monkey on, like, it would just be better than all that. So you and I have talked a lot about George W. Bush and my service to George W. Bush and all the times that we've come on. And I will always be proud to have worked for George W. Bush, to have worked for the entire Bush family. There is no issue on which he was more right than comprehensive immigration reform. And most recently, there was no statement that he uttered that was more wise, and I think a more important warning to the Republican Party than to do comprehensive immigration reform, because it is the right thing to do, not for political purpose. And when you head down the path, when you even leave the impression that perhaps your motive is political, this is what happens. You empower pundits and conservative talk show hosts who are powerful, like it or not, they are powerful in our world. But if your entire motive is political, then you hand them the power to influence the outcome. If your motive is to fix a problem, and let me just be clear, there is no more important political purpose for Republicans than to show that we are competent and we can govern. So forget about what group benefits. We must show that we have competence, because above all else, we're supposed to be the party that can fix things, that can do government better by making it smaller and smarter, more efficient. So this is an opportunity for Republicans. This is an opportunity to show that we can get the policy right. This is an opportunity to show that we are ruled by not just political motive, but by a desire to do the right thing. And I reread his 2006 address to the nation, where George W. Bush made a call on, it was on the Congress, but it was really a call to his own party to stand with him, and very few of them did. And that speech really laid out exactly where we are today in the Senate bill. So Marco Rubio's office has built on all of the failures of our 2006 effort. They have put together a much better effort. They brought along the conservative sort of talking class as far as they can. And to see it fall apart now would be a policy disaster. And I think the political consequences would be dire, but they concern me far less than the consequences of getting this policy wrong and missing the opportunity to do the right thing.
The conservative talking class, the pundits in the conservative media and the conservative side, were on board with the idea of comprehensive immigration reform, even if not to solve the problem.
Which is miraculous.
They were for a second, but it's over now. They've all flipped back. They really have. Like, the Fox is against it. All of the conservative talk show hosts are against it. And while your arguments about how George W. Bush and other pro-immigration reform Republicans have addressed this matter, including Marco Rubio to a certain extent, are true, I remain fascinated by the arguments against. Because the arguments against are really racist arguments. I mean, they're really about preserving the whiteness.
Well, you're talking about the political arguments.
Yeah.
And I really, I resent that politics were ever given any credit for being the motive for doing this. This shouldn't have been done because we were in a dire political stand. That was never George W. Bush's motive.
But when a substantive argument is made about why we should do this, the argument back about why we shouldn't is an argument that has a really disturbing character.
Well, some of them, and I think you've highlighted the most disturbing ones. But the argument to do this, and if you know, again, I've been in touch with Senator Rubio's office, and the best argument for conservatives at a policy level who are uncomfortable with doing this is that the alternative is to leave 11 million people in the shadows. And forget that some of these people are serving in the military, that many of these people are important parts of the fabric of the community. These aren't 11 million people living somewhere else. These aren't 11 million people not living in your state. These are 11 million people living in everybody's state, living in everybody's town, where if they get into a car accident, their motive, their incentive is to leave the scene because they're undocumented. This is a disservice to everybody in this country that thinks that allowing 11 million people to live in the shadows is the right thing to do is on the wrong side of history, and then on the wrong side of this debate, whether they're Republicans or Democrats.
Why can't Republicans better self-police about keeping the really overtly racist side of this argument at least under wraps? I mean, the problem with the Jim DeMint thing is remarkable. Like, Jim DeMint takes over, leaves the Senate in order to become more powerful, he thinks, at Heritage. Brings on this guy really from the deep and dirty corners of the internet. You have to go to places where you're worried about the safety of your future online shopping adventures when you can find out this stuff. And really tried to make that the centerpiece of the anti-immigration argument among Republicans. They're not arguing with Democrats.
Right.
This is an argument between Republicans.
Right. Sure.
And
it has been since 2006.
Ron Paul, Jim DeMint, really deep, dark stuff there persists. And it's not going anywhere.
And the only way to stamp it out is to shine a light on it, as you did quite expertly, and to prevail. I mean, George W. Bush is going to attend a naturalization ceremony tomorrow. I was in contact with his office, and he's not trying to weigh into the politics of this or the legislative process. He made a grander and a greater effort than anyone has in a very long time in 2005 and 2006. But I think that to line up behind Marco Rubio and the 13 other Republicans who voted for it in the Senate, to line up behind Paul Ryan, who in the House has been extremely constructive. He cares about comprehensive immigration reform. He has complete credibility with the most conservative Republicans in our party and the most conservative Republicans in the House. And you know, the hope for people like me who care about the future of the Republican Party, about doing the right thing and then reaping the political benefits after doing the right thing, is that those voices will prevail.
We'll see. I think it's going to be really.
You're on it.
It's going to be really
Masks,
interesting to watch the response.
Monkeys, and bands.
I promise. Next time there will be monkeys.
There must be monkeys.
Nicole Wallace, you are a dear friend for doing this. Former communications director for George W. Bush's administration and former senior advisor for McCain-Palin, for which you are still doing penance. It is great to have you here.
Thank you
so much. We'll be right back.